This is part 2 of our restoration video of a 1951 Pontiac radio, which came out of a 1951 Pontiac Chieftain. And the radio was sent to me by one of my customers in Iowa who caught my website, and interestingly enough told me that he could not find somebody down in his area, and he is from near Omaha, to work on his radio. So I said, well, send it to me. And I have pretty good luck with old car radios. I'll see what I can do for you. And this radio has borne the brunt of cold Iowa winters and hot Iowa summers. So it's in need of quite a bit of work. I've already gotten the push button assembly to function. So in this video we will work on the manual tuning function. And as you can see, if I can get the pointer to operate here, you can see the pointer jumping around in there. The pointer operates quite well. What I did was to let it sit overnight in liquid wrench. I soaked this pivot arm here, or pivot arm post I should say, quite well with liquid wrench, being careful to keep it away from these tuning coils. And then I went over here to this pivot arm stud and soaked that with penetrating oil. And by morning, the following morning, the push button assembly operated as new. These things can create a lot of headache. I was quite thankful that it did work as it did, because quite often push buttons stick, push button springs need to be restretched or replaced. Sometimes the clutch assembly sticks, and you can literally spend 3 hours working on just the push button assembly, push button function of a vintage car radio. What we're going to do now is take a look at just exactly what makes the manual tuning function of this radio operate. And I'm going to remove a sheet metal screw which is barely holding the tuning assembly in place. The faceplate is the main piece of the radio that holds this tuning assembly from wobbling around. So we have to be very careful not to disturb the wires that go to the individual coils. So I've removed the screw, and we're going to get the tuning assembly out where we can see it better and work on it. Think of this assembly right here as the clutch assembly in a vehicle. We've got the release mechanism, the spring that operates the release mechanism, the pressure plate, the flywheel, and the flywheel shaft or drive shaft. In this case, this is the tuning shaft for the variable condenser. And what happens is, when you push a push button, you can see how that separates. So that separates the manual tuning shaft function of the radio from the push button function of the radio. So that when you, very simply, so when you push a push button, the tuning shaft doesn't turn. But right now, our tuning shaft, worm gear drives the gear ahead of it as it is supposed to, but it is not turning the flywheel. So we're going to remove the flywheel portion here and attempt to make the tuning shaft assembly manual tune the radio. Simple as that, isn't it? So I've got a little tool here that I can work on the T-head bolts with and remove this. Usually it doesn't work just to push it up tighter, push this plate up tight against the drive plate. Have to do a little extra work on it. So I still don't have it. Yeah, I loosened it up quite a bit. I'm just going to set this down and use two hands. I realize some guys that shoot videos, and women too, work with 2 or 3 cameras, a whole studio array of equipment. I've just invested some pretty hefty dollars in bench equipment, so the studio array of equipment is going to have to wait a while. So I have removed the flywheel portion, and there you see the rubber disc pad, which goes up against the this clutch plate, and the pressure between the pad and the clutch plate allows manual tuning of the radio. And it sticks. Have to be very careful when removing it. And maybe we won't. Maybe we'll just leave it. It looks as though it has been actually held in place with some glue. So I'm going to use some mineral spirits and clean that surface and put it back onto the radio, the drive shaft, and see if we can get the radio to tune manually. And if it doesn't, then we'll have to get into using some belt slip, things like that, and that usually does the trick. But then, so again, there's this. I'm getting a little black off of it. One thing about paint thinner, it does eat rubber. And it takes a minute or so to dry. This radio is going to be a real challenge because every capacitor in it has to be replaced. All resistors have to be checked for value. We'll take a look at that in another video. Video after this, I believe we will take a look at the vibrator, the actual vibrator for the radio, as well as the OZ4 rectifier were missing. So I had to get into the parts box a little bit, and I came up with a vibrator. So it didn't work. So we'll have to deal with the repair of that in the next video. Well, this is beginning to dry, and we'll put it onto the variable condenser drive shaft and see if we can get the radio to function with manual tuning. Now put it on as tightly as I can, pushing in a little bit. Push in a little bit. See my fat fingers there. Push in a little bit on that spring, just a hair. It's not hurting anything. It just gives me a little extra pressure between those two discs. Getting over a little cold too, so pardon the sniffles. And I'll turn down tightly with my key-bolt tool on one and then on the other, and hopefully this repair will work. We shall see what we shall see. You can probably see it better than I can. Are we making some progress? By Joe, look at that. Uh-oh, made a wire out of it. then I think what we'll do, I'll make one more attempt to tighten this, and if that doesn't work, we'll have to resort to using a little belt slip on it. Hold it tightly there, real tight. Tighten that one in, and tighten this one in as well. Beats using duckbill pliers. No, it didn't work. So, hopefully we won't have to replace the pad or make another one, although I have made those. I'm going to use some belt slip as soon as I remove this. There we go. This is belt drive non-slip here. It works pretty good. Use that on dial belts, use it on drive pucks, drive turrets, on old record changers. And we'll use a little bit on this disc here. And it takes a minute or so to dry. And then we should be ready to slip it back on the shaft, tighten our T-head bolts, and give it a go, see what happens. And it's drying quite nicely there. I just applied some all over the surface. Kind of a sticky rosin. I remember a shop I worked for years ago back in Rochester, Minnesota. They really frowned on using that stuff. They believed in replacement, and in those days, replacement was not a real challenge. But try to find something like this, and that can be a challenge. So we'll see if it works. One thing I'm going to do, and should have done it right away, is clean some of the residue off of the friction plate. Clean that up really good. This is all self-evident when you get into repairing these things. You learn these little tricks, and most of the time they work. I'll slip this back on the shaft and quickly tighten this up because I can see our time on the old camera is running down. There we go. And tighten this one. Just like that. And we'll see. Nothing more irritating than a dial that slips. I could compare it to something, but this may be a family video with children watching, learning how to fix old radios, so I think I'll skip on the metaphor. And it works quite well. So, with that, join me in our next video, and we'll discuss repairing the vibrator for our vibrator power supply on this 1951 Pontiac radio. Have a good day, and straight ahead.